Joining us is Stephen Maijoor of the ESMA, very much the regulator of the European securities industry, and thank you very much for joining us. Really looking at the industry as we see that in 2015, what is the outlook that you have for the securities business, particularly since there are new regulations coming into force?
Well, maybe a couple of points on these issues. In general, what we're seeing now in securities markets is quite exuberant markets. And that is part of the very low interest rate, which makes investing in more risky products very attractive. So corporate bonds are issued very frequently. The stock exchange performance is on average very high, but it also means a risk in terms of overvaluation in the non-banking sector.
Stephen, as far as that's concerned, that sounds terrific from the regulatory point of view, but what about from the innovation point of view? Would you find a lack of innovation as people's ideas wither on the vine, as it were, when regulations come into force like this?
I think and obviously I will take the viewpoint from a regulator, and we have to be much more concerned compared to before the crisis on financial innovation. Securitizations were an important financial innovation, and we now know that they performed much different from what we had hoped. And so within ESMA, we are specifically looking into financial innovation, monitoring these new products, monitoring new services in the financial sector, and see what the risks might be either for investors or for the stability of the system.
And would you see much more investment, do you think, from the Asia Pacific, particularly from China, from the developing world, if you like, if these regulations come into play and they work out as you expect them to?
Well, I think the interaction between Europe and Asia has already goes back a long time. There's, especially in the asset management area, there's been a lot of investments coming from Asia into Europe. There are the right vehicles in place to regulate and supervise that properly. But we also have a lot of interactions on, for example, the OTC derivatives area, where there are CCPs here in Hong Kong which are interested in providing services to European clients.
And really, Stephen, looking at Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is one of the major investment capitals, if you like, of Asia, do you see a lot coming from Hong Kong, specifically into Europe, looking at some of the instruments and so forth that you would be regulating?
Yeah. Well, Hong Kong is an important market for Europe. There's been a long term that we already cooperated with the Hong Kong regulators, with the European regulators. But I must say, there's also other important financial centers in Asia where there's a long-term interaction on the regulatory and supervisory level between those financial centers and European regulators.
Now, the theme of the Asian Financial Forum 2015 is sustainability in the region in a world of change. But what would that sustainability really mean to you in the world, basically, of regulating?
Well, maybe a bit surprisingly, but there's been a lot of debate to what extent the regulatory reform in response to the financial crisis is hampering the economies to get back on track and to grow again. But I see the regulatory reform in response to the financial crisis as being part of the sustainable growth. What we have had in the past years was basically not sustainable growth. It had been, in the years up to the crisis, we have had a very expansionary period, but in the end it proved to be not the right type of economic growth. And the reason that we now have this regulatory reform is that we don't have the type of financial crisis that we have seen and observed in the past, let's say, 7-8 years.
And really, you have just attended this first day of the Asian Financial Forum. What's your impressions of the forum as you've seen it so far?
Well, I think maybe two elements. Maybe a bit on form. It's a very well organized, very disciplined conference with, it's really perfectly organized. I'm really impressed by that. But clearly where Asia, and what you can see and what you can feel, is that the level of growth, the economic growth figures here for Asia are very good, very solid, and sometimes as a European I'm a little bit jealous of those growth figures.